Good morning. If everybody would take their seats and settle in, we'll start with our opening meditation this morning. It is called The Threads in My Hand, and it's written by Howard Thurman. It's in his book, Meditations of the Heart. This is such a mess. All of these threads, and they just won't come right. Let us take a moment of silence. Only one end of the threads I hold in my hand. The threads go many ways, linking my life with other lives. One thread comes from a life that is sick. It is taut with anguish, and always there is lurking fear that the life will snap. I hold it tenderly. I must not let it go. One thread comes from a high-flying kite. It quivers with the mighty current of fierce and holy dreaming, invading the common day with far-off places and visions bright. Now one thread is but a tangled mass that won't come right. Mistakes, false starts, lost battles, angry words, a tangled mass. I have tried so hard, but it won't come right. One thread is a strange thread. It is my steadying thread. When I am lost, I pull it hard and I find my way. When I am saddened, I tighten my grip and gladness glides along its quivering path. When the waste places of my spirit appear in arid confusion, the thread becomes a channel of newness of life. One thread is a strange thread. It is my steadying thread. God's hand holds the other end. Amen. Our lecture this morning is titled Physicians of the Soul, Past, Present, and Future. And after the lecture, we will have time for discussion and interaction. A physician of internal medicine once sat at his oak desk and listened to the context of his patients' lives. His patients sat in a green armchair and told of their aches and pains, their grief and frustration. He told me once, I spend a lot of time listening. He prescribed medicine, performed clinical procedures, took x-rays, and gave physicals. When his patients were dealing with a grief issue, he would recommend to them a sad movie, and they would have a good cry. He made house calls. He took produce as payment. And when his patients could not pay, he made exceptions. Now, it was not uncommon for him to sit by the bedside of elderly patients who had no other family to sit with them. You see, he offered medicine as ministry. This term, medicine as ministry, has been developed by Dr. Margaret Moorman, who is professor of pediatrics and biomedical ethics at UVA's School of Medicine, in her book, Medicine as Ministry. And I quote, anyone who teaches clinical medicine will have observed that hospitalized patients in medical centers often love the green third-year medical students assigned to them and look upon them as their primary physicians. Now, one of the reasons she believes is because these third-year medical students are so green and new at everything, they don't have all the answers, and they don't have a set agenda in which to respond to what they hear. And so they don't know enough to direct the story into structured lines that they are taught to use. And so their patients feel like they have been heard by someone. When the physician of internal medicine retired, he gave me his oak desk and the green chair in which his patients sat. And now I, as a minister and a theologian and a professor of pastoral care at Perkins, I now sit at his oak desk in my office here at Perkins School of Theology, and I listen to the context of people's lives. And from that green chair, I hear a lot about psychic pain, internal illness, and some physical complaints, and stories of healing as well. I have become a physician of the soul, and as such, metaphorically speaking, offer ministry as medicine. Many of you have probably sat in that chair in my office, and I do want to add that that physician was my father, a physician of internal medicine. And now I have become a professor of pastoral care, a physician of the soul. It is noteworthy that in some cultures, the healer and the religious leader actually are the same person. And it is significant that many medical students today still take the Hippocratic oath, which is before you. With purity and with holiness, I will pass my life and practice my art. This was written, of course, in 460 BC by Hippocrates, an ancient Greek physician. Physicians of the soul are well connected and understanding of the relationship of body, mind, and soul. And Hippocrates hinted at this connection. When you see that word holy, as in pure and holy, this is what it means: devoutly, in a manner pleasing to the gods, and in a holy manner. This is what the physicians of medicine are practicing and saying and committing themselves to. John Chrysostom described physicians of the soul as bestowing attention and tender care by trying every means of amendment in imitation of the best physicians. For neither do they cure in one manner only, but when they see the wound not yield to the first remedy, they add another, and after that, again, another. And do thou accordingly, having become a physician of souls. Unfortunately, this ancient Greek and Christian image has not been given the attention that it needs in pastoral theology. For example, in a collection of images put together by Bob Dykstra, in which there were 21 metaphors of what it means to be a pastoral caregiver today, there is no mention of the phrase physician of the soul, which I am using today. And this is all the more reason for us to examine this metaphor or this image and be concerned about the dis-eases of the soul. Physicians of the soul hear not only life stories, but they hear the silences before the speaking and the new images that surface in the telling. This listening is not a parroting or mimicking of what the person says. Rather, it is listening with the ear of God for the subscripts, for the narrative unfinished, and for the story not yet born. Now, those of you here at Perkins School of Theology will be writing a credo, probably in your third year of a master's program, and this is a statement of your beliefs. Credo means I believe. If physicians of the soul had a credo, it would include these points: a recognition of the interconnection of body, mind, and soul and culture, a stance that no one deserves to be exploited, violated, degraded, or suppressed, a resistance to a culture that does so, an awareness that the body is a place where God can dwell. This awareness results in actions that respect that holy place. A belief that the worth of a person is not based on color, contour, creed, or capabilities. A belief and a commitment to the importance of community in the healing process. A conviction of the critical role of the holding environment, whether that's the pastor's study, the hospital, the chaplaincy, or the prison chaplaincy. An understanding of a patient's essential need to feel valued and to be heard, and an affirmation of both rituals of medicine and rituals of healing. Specialties. Just as physicians of the body specialize, so do we as physicians of the soul. Many of us have specialties that address the aspects of the interconnectedness of body, mind, culture, and spirit. Now, there are three specialties that I have chosen as a pastoral caregiver. And these three are a focus on women's issues, a focus on the violation of bodies, and the third one is love of self. in the pastoral care field in the 1980s, there was a dearth of literature, specifically textbooks, on issues pertaining to a pastoral care of women. We had to put together articles on the subject. There were no textbooks. And so over a 22-year period, I edited or co-edited, along with 50 women in the field, 4 volumes addressing concerns to women in pastoral care. For example, in the slide before you, you'll see that these are traditional developmental stages that are either horizontal or linear. And these are very, very common developmental theories in terms of their stages. However, for women, many of these stages do not speak to our experience, and so we have worked on another way of looking at development. And what I'm doing is I'm using the DNA molecule with its spiraling effect to try to illustrate in one of the volumes I referred to the fact that this is better suited to some of the passages that women make, such as menopause and menstruation. And here is the actual DNA coding from which this paradigm or this structure is taken. Now, as physicians of the soul, we are also concerned about violence that is done to persons' bodies and also the impact of that culture on the person. So, as pastoral caregivers, we hear the story of, for example, women's development unfold through narratives of harm and narratives of hope, and that would have to be interlaced throughout their development. Narratives of harm include both intimate and impersonal forms of violence, sexual abuse, rape, exploitation, degradation, shaming, and disempowerment. Back in 1980, a physician named Christine Northrup gave these statistics that more than 40% of women in the United States have likely been a victim of violence, including childhood sexual abuse, 18%, physical assault, 19% of women, rape, more than 20% of women, and intimate partner violence, 35%. Unfortunately, the speaker that we had last Tuesday at our CHAP session before lunch, whose name is Jeanne and director of the Genesis Outreach and Shelter here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, reaching out to women who have been violated, she gave us, unfortunately, in 2017, these same statistics. We are still dealing with a culture that deals with sexualized violence. Theologian Elizabeth Molt-Monvendel even goes so far to say in her book, I Am My Body, that we should start our theological reflections from the viewpoint of violated bodies. So, my specialties have been a focus on women's issues in pastoral care. It's been a focus on violation to bodies, as well as to one's emotions, and third, love of self. Before I go on to love of self, I want to show you one therapeutic device that I had to use with a woman who had so many associations with all the places in her childhood home of violence, particularly the basement and a cellar in which she was locked and violated, that we were not able to do therapy as I was asked to do with her at Gannon Center for Community Mental Health in Dubuque, Iowa. I was asked to work with her on relaxation exercises. So I tried to go into meditative practices of imaging us by the seaside or by the hillside, or somewhere where it was calm and quiet and birds were chirping or seagulls were flying. And every place that we tried to meditate to try to relax, she had an image of something jumping out from behind her and grabbing her, and she could not do this. I won the raffle at a Catholic church right next door to us in Dubuque, Iowa, and when the women of the church delivered this to me, this is the dollhouse that they gave me. I won this. And I looked at it, and of most interest to me was the back side of the dollhouse, because you see there was no backing to it. And the women of this Catholic church had very lovingly decorated all the rooms. You can see the curtains, and you can see the furniture and the little flower pots, and it was Christmas time, so they had a wagon with gifts in it and so forth. And I brought this into therapy at this community mental health center, and I said to this woman, why don't we sit down in that living room and imagine that we're having tea together or coffee together or lunch together? And she looked at this, and she had no association with this, and what she liked about it was it wasn't a place where she could be trapped. She could get out the back. We kept the front door open, the windows, we kept all the windows open, and the whole back was open. But more than anything, she loved the fact that up in the bedroom, which you can see on the top level, for some strange reason, underneath the bed there was a rectangular, huge cutout, almost as big as the bed. So you couldn't even be trapped in the bedroom. You could even get out of that. So what we did is we sat down in the living room and we imagined, oh, I said, just order anything you want. So she ordered margaritas. I probably should say that in a Methodist institution, but she ordered margaritas, and she had pizza delivery, and we had scones. I mean, we just had the best time imagining being together in a safe space, and that's where we did our therapy of relaxation. So this issue of violence is a very serious matter in pastoral counseling. Going on to love of self. In the 1950s, there were 3 famous theologians that did a study of 90 theological schools around the United States. Their names were H. Richard Niebuhr, Daniel Day Williams, and Jim Gustafson. And they examined 90 theological schools. They put all the findings together in a book called The Purpose of the Church and Its Ministry, and they concluded that the ultimate goal of theological education was to increase among people the love of God and neighbor. God and neighbor. And so for years we have lived with those goals in theological education. Now, when I grew up in the church in Memphis, Tennessee, and I was a churched person, I heard a lot of people speak on love of God and love of neighbor. It comes from Luke 10:27. It's the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan. And here you see a picture of it. The Good Samaritan is leaning over helping that needy person by the side of the road. And fortunately, there's an angel in there, so it's not all falling on the Good Samaritan, at least the assistance and aid. And what I heard in my churches was this, when that was preached, Luke 10:27. And here's exactly how I heard it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor. I never heard the 2 words at the end, as yourself. I never heard a sermon on love of self. I never heard a Sunday school class on love of self. Actually, I thought it was sinful. I thought loving self was narcissistic, or it was selfish. So when I found in this text of Luke 10:27, the parable of the Good Samaritan, that there are 3 loves, not 2, 3. Love of God, love of neighbor, and love of self. I thought, to my thinking, this is revolutionary. That there are 3 loves embedded there, and I didn't know what that meant, to love myself, and I've been on a search ever since. For those of us socialized to take care of others, whether we're the firstborn of the family, whether we're the dutiful child, or whether it's related to our gender or our personality type, there is a tendency to neglect ourselves. And this tendency I find in caregivers, like pastoral caregivers, because we have not realized the interconnection of the 3 loves, love of God, neighbor, and self. So one day when I was sitting on the patio at Emory University of the cafeteria patio, I was speaking to a PhD student in Old Testament, Alice Hickok, and I said to her, my life right now is a young mother with 2 very small children, with a parent who has Alzheimer's, with a teaching load and a counseling load. It is just too much. It is too heavy. I don't think I can carry this. I feel like the Samaritan bending over by the side of the road, and look at that back-breaking posture. Imagine doing that all day. You would have just cramps in your back, leaning over, caring for all the needy children, aging parents, students sometimes, parishioners, counselees. And I said, I am just so tired. And she said to me, Jeannie, that is not the end of that story. I said, what do you mean that's not the end of the story? She said, read the text. She said, the Samaritan didn't stay there the whole time. The Samaritan finished her journey. The Samaritan finished her journey. She took the wounded person on an animal to the inn, handed over the wounded person to the innkeeper, and said to the innkeeper, you take care of this person. I have to finish my journey, but I'm going to be very responsible. I'm going to come back, I'm going to pay whatever's owed, and I'm going to come back and visit. But I have to go on with my journey. So somehow, in the parable, this Samaritan managed to balance love of the other and love of self in a way that I had just never seen before. Although we cannot go so far as to say that the Good Samaritan is Jesus Christ in this parable, we can say that Christ was a unique realization of the Good Samaritan. However, to say that Christ intended the Good Samaritan to represent himself as he related to the wounded and the fallen of humankind is more than we can ever know, quoting Alfred Plummer. But what we can say is that many of us as caregivers seek to follow in the footsteps of this Good Samaritan. And whereas the actions of the Good Samaritan may be seen more in the category of crisis ministry, we as physicians of the soul today do crisis ministry, and we also move into preventative care. I want to show one other slide, because when I was speaking to my friend Alice Hickok, and I was just so excited about this new image of there being a way to finish the journey of oneself while caring for others, I said to her, I wish I had a picture of that. And I said this in one of my classes in Dubuque, Iowa, and a few days later there was a knock on my office door, and a student came with this original picture of Jesus actually handing over the wounded person on the animal to the Good Samaritan and saying, take care of him. Actually, the innkeeper was better suited to do this, to take care of the wounded person. And so in pastoral care, what we're doing now is trying to link up with other caregivers to find the innkeepers. It could be a support group like Resolve or AA or Bosom Buddies. It could be Genesis Outreach or Shelter or the Rape Crisis Center that we work with. But we're trying to find the innkeepers and distribute the care and the responsibility in taking care of others. Now, for many years, physicians of the soul were concerned with diseases of the soul or pathologies. And the forward direction today is in the area of preventive care, which is health maintenance or well-being. Some of my future work in preventive care is to engage positive psychology's theory of the good life with family systems, an approach utilized by many of us teaching pastoral care. Positive psychology's broad theories, such as the good life and the family systems concept of self-differentiation, can be engaged with the Christian doctrine of sanctification. Here at Perkins School of Theology, we teach family systems every fall, because we believe this is one way to engage in preventative pastoral care. We live amidst many, many systems. Just think about it. The circulatory system, the computer system, the respiratory system, the neurological system, the criminal justice system, the legal system, the political system. We live in systems, but we also live in a family system. And you have been impacted by your role in your family of origin. That would be the family into which you were born, fostered, or adopted. And we play roles in these families. Maybe you were the dutiful child, maybe you were the lost child, maybe you were the clown of the family, or maybe you were the scapegoat. But you played a role in the family from which you came. If we don't look at the role that we play in that family of origin, we can repeat that in ministry. We can unconsciously repeat that role in ministry. And many of us were firstborn children. We're very dutiful and responsible, and we take on that role in ministry, and we tend to overfunction. Ironically, when we differentiate from our family system, we can truly come home. I want to tell you this one story that illustrates this, and it's from the Midwest. A farmer went hunting for a bird to domesticate, and he discovered an eaglet. He was so happy he took the little eaglet home, and he put the eaglet in his chicken coop. Well, that little eaglet started to walk like a chicken, started to peck like a chicken, and it started to act like a chicken. One day, a very kind naturalist came to visit the farm. He looked in the chicken coop and he said to the farmer, that's not a chicken, that's an eaglet. The farmer said, no, it walks like a chicken, it pecks like a chicken, it eats like a chicken. The naturalist said, wait a minute, let me try something. So he asked permission to take the little eaglet out of the pen or the cage, the chicken coop, and he stands outside the chicken coop and puts the eaglet right on his arm. A little breeze comes by and the eaglet did nothing. On the second visit, the kind naturalist asked the same thing, and this time he went up to the top of the barn, and he stood up there with the little eaglet on his shoulder. A little breeze came by, nothing happened. On the third visit, the kind naturalist, who you can see was rather persistent, asked the same thing, and he took the little eaglet. This time, he climbed up to a hill. We don't really have mountains in Iowa, but he climbed up to the tallest hill that he could find, and it overlooked a valley with a river, and there were other birds flying. Actually, there were some eagles flying. It was very close to the Mississippi River in Dubuque, and he was up there and he saw some. And so this little eaglet, all of a sudden, he looks up in the sky, he sees the sun, he sees the trees moving, he sees this flock of birds, eagles flying over the Mississippi River. All of a sudden, this little eaglet takes a big draft of the wind, puffs up his chest, spreads his wing, and he flew away. Some of us have experienced lives of restrictions, and we've known false expectations like that little eaglet. And as we experience freedoms and find our own authenticities, we are carried to a mountain of metamorphosis and a peak of possibilities. And we're able to look at those stereotypes that people have of us and the barriers that are constructed around us. We take a glimpse of another way, and then we can fly and be our authentic selves. And this is what Family Systems offers to us. It's not so far away from the understanding of sanctification, when God calls us to be all that we were created to be, our authentic self. Some of the students that have taken this course, one in particular, Ella McDonald, found out at the end of this course on Family Systems this: God loved me all the time. I was never really alone. I know now what love is. Earlier, I couldn't love myself. Hence, I couldn't let others love me. But now, I am a new creation. Physicians of the soul, past, present, and future, work toward the healing of the individual and the world as new creations. I'm going to end with a story told to me by Fred Craddock, preacher, New Testament scholar, and master storyteller. I actually called him one day, asked him to speak into the telephone. I had it taped, and I said, Fred, would you tell me this story about the young man that you found out about when you were at the Black Bear Inn? And he said, I'm so glad you called me, Jeannie, because I've heard so many renditions of this story. I'd be glad that somebody got it right. And it's in my book, The Spirit of Adoption, which you're welcome to read in the introduction. He says, my wife and I were on vacation in Gatlinburg, that would be in Tennessee, and over to our table came this old man who was a greeter, and I learned later, a part owner of the Black Bear Inn. He said, good evening, and we said, good evening, and he asked where were we from, and at that time we were from Oklahoma. And then he asked what I did, and I was getting a little irritated because he was a stranger and he didn't need all that. But when I told him I was a minister, he said, oh, I have a story about a minister, and pulled out a chair and sat down at our table, uninvited, by the way, but it was his business. I thought he was going to tell a joke. You know, everybody has a joke about a minister, and I thought, well, he's going to tell one, and I'm going to pretend I've never heard it before, and I'm going to smile, and he's going to go away. But at any rate, he said, the guest, not the guest, actually the owner of the Black Bear Inn, said to Fred Craddock, I was born not far from here, out from the village of Cosby, in a place called Laurel Springs. My mother was not married. The children at school made fun of me, and I ate my lunch alone. I hid during recess because they said ugly things to me. When I went to town, people looked at my mother and me, and I just figured they were trying to make guesses as to who was my father. So I had a very painful childhood. In the course of it, I started going about middle school age to Laurel Springs Christian Church in the woods. I mean, it had kerosene lamps, and the preacher had a grizzly beard and a deep voice. I liked to hear him preach, but I didn't want to be embarrassed, so I always sat in the very back of the church, and I would just scoot out after the sermon because I didn't want anybody to stop me and ask me questions. Well, one day, some of the people gathered in the aisle before I could get out, and I got blocked. And while I was trying to work my way out, I suddenly felt this hand on my shoulder, and I looked around, and I could see the face and the beard of that preacher, and I was scared to death because I was always afraid of being embarrassed in public. He stared at me as though he was trying to guess what man in the community was my father. And after a while, he looked at me carefully, and he said, boy, you are a child of... And then he just paused, and I just froze in embarrassment. He said, boy, you are a child of God. I see a striking resemblance. And then he swatted me on the bottom, and he said, now you go and claim your inheritance. Well, I left the church, and I'm telling you, that was really the first day of my life. Well, at this point, the man telling the story, Fred Craddock, said to the owner of the Black Bear Inn, he said, what is your name again? And the man said, Ben Hooper. Now, I remembered, said Fred Craddock, my father talking about the people of Tennessee twice electing Ben Hooper as governor of the state of Tennessee, although he was called publicly by the opposition the bastard governor. My father said the people of Tennessee twice elected a bastard governor. The former governor wanted this story told. He said to me, my papers are at the University of Tennessee, and they're going to be published after my death, and I have asked that my story be told as the preface of encouragement to children born here in the mountains of Tennessee, children of questionable background. That was Ben Hooper. It was that expression, you are a child of God. I see a striking resemblance. Go and claim your inheritance. Craddock said that was the most moving experience I'd ever had. It came as such a surprise, especially when I was resisting that man even being there, interrupting our evening meal. That was quite a moment. It is a true and remarkable story. And so now I close this lecture today with these words. Now, you children of God, go now and you claim your inheritance. Thank you. And we'll now have questions and answers.